Welcome to the Thriving Leaders podcast, where we dive into real conversations that help leaders grow, teams flourish, and organisations thrive. I'm your host, Claire Gray, Leadership and Team Facilitator at Thriving Culture. I'm also the author of Thriving Leaders, Learn the Skills to Lead Confidently. This podcast is filled with practical tools, tips, actions, and insights that you can immediately apply so you can lead confidently now. In season 2 of the Thriving Leaders podcast, I'm interviewing thought leaders from around the world to pick their brains on what it takes to build a thriving team. This is helping me write my second book, Thriving Teams, which will be out later in the year in 2025. I hope you enjoy the podcast. Mark Butler is one of those rare people who brings both clinical depth and corporate experience to the table. A human behaviour and team performance specialist, Mark has worked with high-performing teams in some of the most fast-paced, high-pressure environments. As a clinical mental health expert, author, and member of the Workplace Committee for the World Federation for Mental Health, Mark brings a global lens to what it takes to lead in a rapidly changing world, especially as AI, burnout, and constant change put new demands on leaders and teams. Mark also lives down the road, literally, in Byron Bay, and I often see him walking his dog, Murphy. Hi, Mark.
How are you, Claire? I was even thinking we should have sat beside each other for this one. Would have been
I
an
know, we're
interesting.
only a stone's throw away. Yeah.
I can probably hear you if I listen out.
I am pretty loud.
Yeah.
So let's start with your story for our listeners who might not know much about your work. How do you describe what you do and why it matters?
Well, the one sentence punch probably for me would be I help people work better together. And that's been a clinical as well as a kind of a corporate focus. So my background is both corporate and clinical. I was working in film and television for a number of years, a great number of years, but also worked in the clinical space sort of alongside that. And then segued from one into the clinical side of things, where I spent a lot of time developing treatment programs for at-risk populations, first responders, veterans, etc., and people overcoming addictive processes. What I've learned through all of that is I think we all face challenges and there are overlaps across all of them. And so sometimes that something that might be traumatic will manifest itself in corporate environments or in thriving teams just as much as it would in a team of first responders. You know, this is how our body reacts to stress and how our body reacts to trauma and overwhelm. So I help people work better together in that space. Most recently, with teams around developing what we call their relational intelligence, which is sort of the next step along from emotional intelligence. Your viewers and listeners would probably be aware of people like Daniel Goleman and Travis Bradbury and Adam Grant and Gene Greaves, people in that space. Michelle McQuaid was a recent guest of yours. She's very strong in this area as well. And Dr. Amy Edmondson was also one of your podcast guests. That was an excellent podcast, by the way, can I just say? All of these people, we talk about emotional intelligence and how important it is. And Travis Bradbury and Gene Greaves actually put a dollar value on it. And they said leaders with a high level of emotional intelligence this was 20 years ago, they were earning about 20,000 US more per year than a leader that had lesser emotional intelligence, somebody who kind of just came up by osmosis. And so that number is probably closer to 40,000 a year now. So if anybody ever needed a monetary motivation, there's one, you know. So now I work with, and the extension from that emotional intelligence, I think, is relational intelligence. And that's the space I'm doing a lot of work now in. That's about building trust and connection and performance, which sounds like things leaders do anyway, but there's a way in which we do it that can hold the space in a team without trying to jump in and rescue and save everything and leave things not work themselves out, but don't rescue and save. That's not a leader's job. A leader's job is to allow this to emerge and hold it so that everybody can experience what they need to fully. And
Yeah.
that's relational intelligence. It's the next step along. It's not emotional intelligence with a new haircut. It is actually somewhat different.
And what do you think the fundamental differences are between relational intelligence and emotional intelligence?
Well, I think emotional intelligence really is around sort of learning to recognize emotional responses in ourselves And I'll make a statement now. I'll say feelings drive behavior. And I'm going to come back to that in a second. I'm just going to leave that percolate for a sec. But emotional intelligence is our ability to recognize our emotional response to our environment. And then the next step along from that would be learning to regulate our emotions so that we drive them rather than them driving us, right? And then the next step from there would be, generally speaking, recognizing emotions in other people because we have an ability to recognize and regulate our own. And when you're good at that, what you can do then is motivate them to be the best version of themselves. That's emotional intelligence at its best, if you like. But relational intelligence, then, the analogy I use is we're going to look at the dance. We're not going to look at the dancers. So it's more than the individual's behavior or the individual's demeanor, if you like. This is this sort of soundtrack that we create from the actions between us. It might be useful to think of a company in the army. The sum is always going to be greater than just the individual parts. And it's what I do that means I matter and I'm contributing to the overall outcome is the bit that needs to be sort of contained, if you like. So look at the dance, not the dancers. Look at the actions of the unit rather than the individuals themselves, because it's what they're producing. Can I come back on this idea that feelings drive behavior?
Yes, do.
Okay. Sometimes I can give very long answers to questions that might have appeared.
That's
So
good.
sorry about that. So, look, this is fundamental psychological truth, and that is that we are constantly responding to emotional responses. And how I describe that to people, I say every conscious act, action, behavior, decision that you or I will make is underpinned by some kind of an emotion, some kind of a felt sense that we have that drives that behavior. And that emotion or that felt sense is underpinned by some kind of a need that we have from ourselves or from our environment. A simple analogy would be I'm dehydrated, so I feel thirsty, and that'll make me go and get a drink. Does that make sense? You could even use something along the lines of I'm feeling some kind of shame, makes me angry, and then my outburst is going to determine what my actions are. So my actions are, we sometimes think the thinking cognitive prefrontal cortex is driving the whole machine. It's the last place to know what's going on in our worlds and in our bodies. Now, that might sound like a flippant throwaway statement, but it's actually fundamentally psychologically true. We are in response to what our emotional response to our environment is. And when leaders understand that it's never the other way around, it's always our actions are the result or the outcome of what we're feeling. So the feelings that we experience drive behaviors. And I think when we understand that, then we start to look at what's our emotional response. So don't look at the dancers, look at the dance that's being created, because that's the emotional soundtrack of your team. That's where your answers are, not what some individual is doing.
So I love this concept of relational intelligence, and this language is fairly new to me and something that I'm not very familiar with, but I can see the synergies to thriving teams and how you build a thriving team because it is about the relationships and the dynamics that's happening between people. So what are some of the signs within a team that there's relational intelligence?
Yeah, right. Look, in my mind, it has to start with psychological safety. If we can't be our true selves, then we're responding emotionally through something that looks like fear or disengagement or jadedness or something like that. Incidentally, things that come up when we're feeling burned out as well. Burnout is suppressed emotions, if you want to boil it right down. That might sound simplistic. We can come back to that in a minute. But really, it's the emotional response that people have to their environment is going to determine how they behave. And if I have to hide or I feel some kind of stigma around not being able to keep up or feeling overwhelmed or AI is taking my job or whatever it is, if I don't feel like it's okay to not be okay sometimes, and that my opinion matters, we'll say, well, then if I won't feel psychologically safe in the team. And if I don't feel that, then nothing else is going to land for me. And I'm sure that's your conversation. And I know you talk about accountability and how important that is. That requires a sense of psychological safety as well, I think, doesn't it? You know,
Definitely.
so a relationally intelligent team has to begin with psychological safety. It's okay to have a difference of opinion. and I need to be able to express it. And I need to be able to express when I'm feeling frustrated as well, because it's part of my experience. And if I can do that, well, then others can work with me in that space or can resolve the issues or whatever the pressure point or pain point is. So, a relationally intelligent team is one that's able to listen, challenge each other without fear, and recover, I think, quickly from conflict. Don't
Mm.
suppress the conflict, meet it, deal with it, and learn from it and move on, which sounds like psychological safety, but it takes an emotionally aware person to be able to do that. And that's where relational intelligence, I think, comes in.
Yeah, definitely. Well, the link between psychological safety and accountability is so important. And I think the link there is that teams can have that healthy, challenging debate, get everything out that needs to be said, and I guess be able to move on from it and put the challenge between them and not make it go from a task conflict to a relationship conflict too, which probably leads to intelligence.
Play the ball, not the player.
Yeah.
I think that's the important point. And I'm really looking forward to your next book, which I believe is coming over the horizon, because I know you talk about this topic and I cannot wait to get stuck in.
Yeah, not long, not long. The 12th of November, it will be out. So very exciting. So, what are some early signs that relational intelligence or relational trust is breaking down within a team?
Mm,
And
mm.
what do leaders need to do to ensure that performance doesn't derail?
Probably the signs that you're going to see are will be common for anybody anywhere, and the same in teams or any relationship. When people stop speaking up, when they start withholding effort, when the internal competition in teams isn't always healthy. So I have information, but I'm not going to share it because somebody else could get an advantage. You know what I mean? And I want to be next in line for a promotion. When you got that kind of an atmosphere in a team, or I need to curry favor with my boss and I'm going to withhold something from you that'll land you in trouble. That kind of stuff, those sorts of dynamics can arise in teams when people don't feel completely at ease. We start to assume the worst in each other, withdrawal, second guessing, eye rolls in meetings, all of the stuff that tells you there's an issue and emotionally there's a problem here. Escalation of minor issues can happen. And I think, look, just people going through the motions uh, tends to show that relational intelligence, the dance that we're creating here, is not going to be choreographed well. And so leaders kind of need to surface these tensions early. But to be able to do that, they have to be able to recognize what the emotions are themselves and sometimes get behind what's being said. It's not always what's being said is what the problem is.
Mm.
And I learned that as a clinician years ago. Someone would come for therapy and they'd say, I'm having a problem with this, this, and this. And you go, yeah. By the third session, you go, that's not really the problem, is it? It's actually this unspoken thing that you haven't been saying. And then the work begins. So sometimes it's just about being able to read the atmosphere. I call it the soundtrack of the team. If you're watching a movie, actually, it's a good question for you, Claire, because I don't notice it very often. Do you notice the soundtrack in a movie when you're watching it, or is it just kind of
Oh, it depends. It depends if it's known or how many times I've watched it, I reckon.
yeah, right,
Yeah.
that's a good one. How many times you've watched it? And the reason why that is because there's a familiarity you now have,
Mm,
which leaders will have with a team. So the ability to hear the soundtrack is going to be more sort of pronounced.
mm,
So it's a bit, if I was watching a scary movie and I turn down the sound, it's not going to be as scary. And
mm,
if I put circus music in instead of the scary, the junk, 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 junk kind of music, it would have a totally different flavor and would have a totally different meaning. But so the emotional resonance in a team is in the background, and it takes an attuned ear to look out for it. And that's the training I do with leaders. And the training I do then with teams as well. Very often, I'm brought in to repair ruptures, we'll say, or some kind of rapid change or risk that's occurring. And when leaders are able to recognize and notice that atmosphere, that music, the culture in your team, essentially, when they're able to sort of fine tune and be able to listen into, that's when they are most adept at this idea of holding that space so that it's safe for it to process itself and
yeah.
work through it and figure out. But you got to do it early.
I like this
Mm,
metaphor around the soundtrack and the
mhm,
dance, and I think maybe that's what relational intelligence is, and correct me if I'm wrong, is it the leader's ability to be able to identify what the soundtrack is that's playing right now? Is this something that's been repeated before? Is it repeated behaviors of how we're collectively operating or not talking about a certain issue? Or talking in circles and not making a decision.
Yeah.
And that relational intelligence to be able to notice, observe, and call that out to the team and play it back.
Yeah, yeah, and then say, "What are we gonna do about it? I'm holding us in this space right now. We're not gonna paper over the cracks. Let's just figure out what's going on here."
Yeah.
And I think that's when a team will feel successful, if you like. It's we're practicing that curiosity, modeling the vulnerability. I'm feeling a little unsafe here because there's an atmosphere in this meeting that I don't recognize from us usually, and I'm wondering what's really going on here. Can we speak to that for a minute?
Yeah. And what
Right?
I'm thinking with the metaphor about the dance, like every team's gonna have a different a dance, whether they're doing a waltz or the cha-cha or twerking or whatever the dance move is. And that's almost like your team's purpose of why your team exists, and that's the dance. But then the music that kind of sits behind the dance as well is probably around the relational intelligence of what
That's
you're
what's
trying to
making
do. Yeah.
them dance to it. That's where the rhythm is coming from. You
Yeah.
know, and like I do a lot of work with organizations experiencing change processes or transformations or mergers or and some kind of a rapid change that's exposing a lot of uncertainty and fear in teams. So when we do experience that period of rupture or risk or rapid change, we start to notice that different atmosphere starting to appear. So now it's a different song or it's a different music that the team is actually reacting to. And it takes an attuned ear to be able to notice what's going on there. And if a leader had an ability to listen to the coffee conversations in the team, if the team, say, a change process, we know 70% of change processes or change initiatives fail, not because of the technical stuff, it's because of the human, the interaction stuff. So if you could secretly or not secretly, that sounds unfair, but if you were able to hear the coffee conversations between team members, if they're backward facing, why do things have to change? Why do we always have to be? Why can't we just do things the way we've always done it? If that's the atmosphere, instead of this change is exciting. It's about time this came along. I can't wait to get stuck into this. This is forward. This is motivating. This is momentum. And this is excitement for the future.
Mm,
Depending on where those two conversations are, they're going to flavor the soundtrack of the team. And you might even have clashing ones. So you can bring that into the room.
yeah.
You know, I'm hearing two different sort of songs being sung here. And what does that sort of look like? Does that make sense?
Definitely. I think that's probably quite common in teams. People are kind of waltzing to the beat of their own drum, or to put it into practical terms, they're doubling down on delivering what they need to deliver for their role and potentially not thinking what collectively or what are our shared goals that we need to deliver right now.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So Jimmy Burrows is a leader. He works with teams. He's based in Mexico. Quite a clever guy. He was sharing some research recently where he said he asked leaders of your team, how many do you think would know the top three priorities of the organization? And most leaders would say somewhere around anywhere between 40 and 60%. But the research says about 2% are aware of the top three priorities of the business. So they're looking down rather than up. And you could argue it's the boss's job to do the blue sky looking up. They kind of have to look in. It's great to be visionary, but you got to be vigilant as well. And so if there's two different songs being played at the same time, it's not going to sound very pretty,
Yeah.
right?
You're giving me a flashback to when I worked at NAB at the National Australia Bank, and Cameron Klein, who was the CEO at the time, a very strong leader. He had his senior leaders in the room, and individually, each of them had to go into a separate room and record into a video what the strategic plan was for NAB. And a really low percentage of them could do it at the time because all these general managers and EGMs had gone off and created their own plan on a page and were driving their own strategy. But collectively, we were not working as a united front, and how do you actually get everyone together to really understand and strip back to the most important things? And, NAB's 40,000 people. It's a big organization. You've got different business units and products and all sorts of things, but still being able to have that shared goal and those shared purposes really, really critical.
Really critical. And when I talk about culture or when I'm brought into that conversation around culture, there's so many people that talk about it. And because I come from a clinical space, I'm much more micro than I am macro. But to my mind, culture in an organization, generally speaking, are words on a page or a poster on the wall. To my mind, it's the culture in the team is going to make or break you. And that might sound like silos, but I think it's the one-on-one relationship that everybody has with each other intertwined becomes the culture. And what we walk past is the culture, is what the culture becomes. It's the bit that's missing. And all of that theory around culture. But to my mind, if the team hasn't got it, it doesn't matter what the organizational culture is. But as I say, 40,000 people working together, you can't have 5,000 cultures. There's got to be some common thread in here. But I think the whole charity begins at home idea, I think, is really important for a team. And this is your audience, thriving teams. What's the culture in your team? What's the soundtrack like? Is it clear or is it muddy? And can you understand it? And actually, so many people are members of a number of teams in an organization as well. So their mindset is going to permeate through different teams.
Yeah,
So
definitely. We're all part of multiple teams. And I
yeah,
think when there's such variance in the microcultures within teams, that can cause friction and tension too. And I'm not suggesting that we want to have an organizational culture, but we want the nuances within teams because I think that kind of makes each team special. But what the things that sit across all, which make it important.
and if I could just add one more thing to that. When we talk about success of an organization, to the business, success is a number, but to your team, success is actually a feeling.
Mm,
And when we're talking about the overall priorities of the organization, success, if most of us don't even understand what the priorities are, we're not going to have a feeling around success there.
mm,
It's a bit like I'm a firm believer. I follow Mark C. Crowley and his ideas. Engagement I see as a lagging indicator of success. Engagement can be the outcome of success rather than the cause of it. To my mind, well-being, and maybe I'm biased because this is the space I work in, but to my mind, well-being and is a better predictor of success in a business. And even Gallup's research is showing that it's a 13 or 23% more engaged and productive when well-being is high in an organization. And again, leaders or teams, you can manage your own well-being. I'm not talking the fruit box on a Friday stuff. I'm talking about teams looking out for each other. And again, the atmosphere that and the emotional response that we have when we feel like we matter and we belong is just enormous.
mm.
Free to instigate, but enormously valuable. But it's going to be a feeling. That's what we're seeing as success.
Yeah.
You know?
So how do leaders create that feeling within teams or build that relational intelligence?
To my mind, it's around starting with psychological safety, ensuring that everybody feels like they're in that space. It's safe. I feel like I belong. And to feel like I belong, we have to feel safe. So we have to be ourselves. We have to be able to be ourselves. We have to trust one another explicitly and implicitly, I think. And very often people think, oh, we build trust over time. I don't think so. I think you will decide whether you feel safe enough to trust your environment done in milliseconds. And then what we have is we've this cognitive justification as to whether that's right or not. And again, trust is highly emotional. And if people think, no, it's not as cognitive, we build it up over time. We go, if your trust's ever been betrayed anywhere in your life, and it's bound to have been somewhere, think back to how it felt rotten. Maya Angelou, people won't remember what you said or did, they'll remember how you made them feel. And so trust, to my mind, is highly emotional. But to feel safe or to trust, to feel like I can trust you, I have to feel safe. And when I have safety and trust, then I can belong. I'm drawing a Venn diagram in my head here now, and I've got safety, trust, and belonging. And Brené Brown talks about belonging and how crucial it is to not just put our best foot forward, not like on a first date, but to truly, warts and all, be able to be ourselves. That's when we will belong. But to my mind, mattering, and Zach Mercurio talks about this a lot as well. And Gordon, I think is his name, Professor Gordon Flett. I hope I got that right. And both Canadians, by the way. But they talk about mattering as the next step along again. So, like, relational intelligence is emotional intelligence 2.0 kind of thing. Belonging is I can be myself and I'm okay to be me, right? Mattering is when I know I'm more than just me being part of a team. What I do adds value. It's noticed, I'm needed, it's necessary, and I'm necessary. When you feel like that, then you know that your contribution matters. And if you've ever been, we've all been kids in school, nearly everyone I speak to can remember a teacher putting in enough effort to let a kid know that they matter, and they can still remember the teacher's name. No idea what the teacher said to them, but they know exactly what it felt like, that someone considered them valuable enough to want to do that. And the research says if we get that sense that we matter just 6 times in a year, so every 2 months, to have somebody say to us, Claire, thank you so much for the work you put in for that meeting, that presentation you did. It was really clear that you put the time and effort into it and it was noticed and valued. Thank you. Well done. You'll carry that for a couple of months. Do you know what I mean? That's that sort of sense that we have that we matter. And it's the next extension again from belonging. And so, leaders, if you can do that for the people in your team, and you can do that through accountability, I think, just as much as you can through praise. So, well done, team. Great week is not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about something specific. People will lock onto it. And that's when you get the sort of mindset, the well being in a team, and the engagement from your people. That's where it comes from. So, relational intelligence, speak to what's going on for people, I think, and then make sure we're looking out for each other. I think that's the other really valuable part.
Mm. I really like Zach's work on mattering. And I
Mm.
think we can all reflect on a time that we've worked in a team where we felt like we mattered, and we were valued and respected, and that we belonged.
Yeah,
And I think for leaders, we know that the research tells us, I think, that leaders are looked more favorably when they show appreciation, gratitude, and thanks to their team, which is like a totally free.
yeah.
And then to extend that further, providing positive feedback and making it really specific about why, I think shows that you care. And even giving constructive feedback shows we care too, if we do it the right way. So I think
Because
there's lots.
that's a leader saying, look, your work is important and you are important, and here's how
Mm,
you can be a little bit better.
mm,
Even performance reviews, I speak to HR people all the time, and a leader will say, we've got to get rid of this person.
mm,
Why? Oh, they're not working out. And you go, well, you're only bringing this up now. If we had included them in the conversation as we progressed, and we said a performance review, whatever your business's language is around that, getting their contribution to say, look, we think you can be better at this. What do you need from us to be a success? And coming from there, rather than saying they're just not hitting their numbers, well, you bring that up before, in the middle of the quarter, not at the end of the quarter.
mm,
It sounds obvious, but you'd be surprised. 60% of leaders will avoid these conversations because they're uncomfortable having them. The fear saying the wrong thing, they don't know if they're going to be judged. There's all sorts of reasons why.
mm. A lot of fear comes into it. And I think
Mm.
treating people as humans and being respectful is really important. And you alluded to that before in terms of 70% of changes fail. So why do you feel like so many changes do fail? What
Mm.
under that?
To my mind, leaders underestimate the emotional and relational and side of the transition. They kind of focus on the technical plan, that's the it stuff, and miss the you and me stuff. I think when we don't have enough information, and generally speaking, it's a lack of information. So if we've lack of clarity around what is changing or why it needs to change, we lack information. We don't have enough to be able to make a rational decision ourselves to make sense of the change that's occurring. Then we're not going to have any kind of control or agency on it. So it's a lack of clarity, lack of information, lack of control. To my mind, when people experience that, they're going to disengage. It's a fear based thing.
Mm,
And we are hardwired to be xenophobic, to fear that which we don't understand. And so when we don't have enough dots to join to make sense of it, we just invent dots. So that the fear will fill the silence.
mhm,
And then the double whammy of that, the other side of that is a psychological idea called the curse of knowledge or the expert's curse. And what that is, an organization is bringing it some kind of transformational or change process through an organization. And senior leadership or the project team are working on it, and they start to kind of assume that everybody has the same information they have. And so they're not feeding enough of it out. And I've worked with organizations who have said, look, don't mention the change until we know exactly what it's going to look like. Your team aren't stupid. They know something's going on. There's lots of behind closed doors conversations, etc., and meetings that they're not privy to. We're going to slip into fear. Oh, it's redundancies. We're going to get sacked. We're merging. And then the rumor mill starts. And our biases kick in, our negativity biases. The bandwagon effect. We've heard a bit of bad news and everybody jumps on and confirms it. The confirmation bias. This has got to be bad. So let's gossip together and we can affirm it ourselves. Which is all of that stuff that happens is a direct reflection of the emotional response to the environment that your team is creating. The soundtrack of your team, again, is going to be something's going on and I don't know what it is, therefore I don't like it and I don't trust it. And the people who are responsible for instigating it are saying, oh, and sometimes it's commercial in confidence, they can't tell you. But even that little snippet is enough information for people to say, look, yes, we are going through a change, and it could be a merger or something like that, or an acquisition. Can't tell you what it is. We believe it's going to be very good for the business. And we want as many people to come on board as we can possibly have. So start thinking how you can add value is a much better response than saying nothing at all. I can't tell you any more information is enough information for people to at least get on board, if you like. Does that make
Mm.
sense?
Yeah, definitely. So what do you think stops leaders being transparent with those communications? Like, what do you think is their fear?
Very often, they think if we keep it a secret, then it's not going to interfere with business as it's conducted right now. But in my mind, and I think the experience most, if not all, organizations would have is that's naive. If you think people aren't going to figure out something's going on, gossip is going to fly around any organization, and as soon as there's any kind of an inkling at all that there's some kind of restructure happening, you start to notice it in the organization. And to my mind, we're not very good at being vulnerable enough to say, look, I can't give you all the information, or I don't know what the information is. All I can tell you is this. And as soon as I know more, I will let you know. And just keep that sort of line of communication open. I don't have any more information is in itself information. And that's what tends to get missed. Or else there's a town hall conversation and it only happens once every quarter while the process is happening. And the CEO reads out a script, if you like, that doesn't sound like it's genuine. Am I going to trust that? Do I feel safe? If I don't feel safe and I don't trust what I'm hearing, I'm never going to feel like I belong or that I matter. And when you don't have that, you have a crumbling organization or a crumbling team. So I think it's to have the information to hand is very, very important. And sharing as much as you can. That's the first place to begin.
Mm. And I think sometimes leaders are in a challenging position. They aren't always privy to the decisions that have been made about change, and then they have to lead people through change when they don't have the answers.
Yeah.
And I love your recommendation around, like, being vulnerable, and I often share that as well when I do leading through change or ambiguity workshops, and letting people know when you're gonna come back to them so that they do have a bit of certainty around that, but also sharing what's relevant. Sometimes we can overshare, and I think that can also feel like people are drinking from a fire hose too. Are
Yeah.
there any tips that you've got for leaders to help lead their people through change?
What if I've learned anything in my years, it is don't be afraid of being vulnerable enough to say, look, I'm not completely across all the change myself either, but I know this is the job we have to do right now, and this is the one that I think we should continue doing. And then rather than minimizing or trivializing it and saying, come on, everybody, it's not going to be that bad. It's going to be great for everyone. Hold the space that people have, allow them to share their experience of what it is, which is relational intelligence. Just have the courage to hold that rupture and hold that space to allow it to work itself. Because if here's something leaders don't like hearing, and yet it's a fundamental psychological truth again. And it's this: when we minimize or trivialize somebody's experience, so for example, we're going through a big change, people are fearful for their jobs. The leader says, no, no, we're all going to be fine. Look, don't worry. Come on, business as usual. Off we go. Everything's going to be great. They think they're doing it to try and appease everybody's anxiety. But in actual fact, what they're doing is they're trying to appease their own anxiety around having to hold information or around having to manage people's expectations and reputations, etc. And so minimizing or trivializing, say, don't worry about it, it'll all be fine, or what have you got to worry about? You're going to be okay. So when we do that, when we minimize and trivialize what we're hearing, or when we minimize and trivialize other people's experience, leaders, heads up, you're actually doing that to ease your own discomfort at the conversation, and it's not about supporting or protecting them. So when you're relationally intelligent, you develop the skills to be able to sit in that discomfort and just hold that space and let everybody speak to what they have to speak to. And because in it's in there that they find support for each other. And the leader who jumps into rescue and save all of that's not necessarily a good leader. They might think they are, but you got to allow this stuff to emerge so that we can deal with it together as a team. It feels a little bit vulnerable and it might feel like, oh, and what if it gets out of control? Generally it doesn't, but at least if it does, then you know who's going to need the most vigilance, I think. This now taps into burnout, to segue very quickly, because one of the three recognized pillars of burnout is this idea of cynicism, this idea of mental jadedness, disconnection, gossip that manifests usually as gossip. I've become overwhelmed, disengaged. I no longer care. But cynicism is an externalization of our discomfort. And I've learned that much from working with people in addiction recovery, as an example. We become cynical, we start gossiping because we're looking to, misery loves company. We're trying to recruit someone else into this place of uncertainty with us because it feels awful, right? And so we start to gossip and we start to make stuff up and join dots that aren't there, etc. And a leader, when you start hearing that in your team, it's time to bring it out in the open and get it spoken to, because that's the way you're going to actually manage it and deal with it and hold it. But trying to crush that down will do no good for the team.
And I think gossip normally comes from a lack of communication, like people have kind
Here we
of
are. Yeah.
filling in the gaps
Yeah.
and making assumptions because there might not be either enough communication or maybe the communication hasn't been transparent enough.
Or they don't like what they're hearing. So
Yeah.
like I was saying, the coffee conversations, if they're backward facing, not going to be, it's not going to be good for team morale. If it's forward facing, then we can bring others on that journey with us. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I do want to up on burnout, but while we're talking about change, one of the biggest changes that people are experiencing right now is AI. And
Yes.
unless you've been sitting under a rock, quite likely using
Yeah.
AI every day, which
Yeah.
I am. There's lots of opportunities there, but with opportunity and change comes some risks as well. What do you see as the biggest risk for AI within teams?
In the short term, I think what we're seeing is this shadow AI use is probably the biggest challenge. Organizations are still getting their heads around what our official response is going to be. And in the meantime, people are using, it could be everything from Copilot to Gemini to Claude to ChatGPT, Perplexity, whichever one it is they're using. But individuals are using it. And the beauty of AI is it never gives you the same answer twice. The problem with AI is it never gives you the same answer twice. So if you have two people on your team, leaders, and they both ask their whatever their, even if it was the same, even if they both ask ChatGPT the same question, they're going to get two slightly different answers. And what's the problem is teams are exhausted, they're really, really busy. Leaders especially, so are being stretched in every different, pulled in every direction, do more with less, etc., etc. When someone in your team can't get to you to ask you a question, or they're going to feel silly for asking it, that's a psychological safety problem that you need to address immediately. But it's happening everywhere. It's much easier to ask something that's going to agree with me and won't remember my stupid question and won't remember me feeling silly when I had to ask it. So it's much easier to ask ChatGPT how to do something than sort of wait to find out from the leader. And every time that happens, that's a lost conversation. Every time that happens, that's a lost coaching or mentoring opportunity that a leader has. Not only that, these people are now off, they're galloping off on some white horse somewhere, doing whatever it is they were told to do. We're already seeing something like in the space of a month, critical thinking and innovative thinking reduces by about 50% in those team members who use AI to answer questions or to create strategy ideas for them, etc. Would just take it as gospel. And it's 85 to 95% right with hallucinations and everything else. And it's never going to say, oh, I don't know the answer to that. Better ask your boss. Right. So you're going to run with whatever it says, and the leader has no idea what it's saying. So it can rupture process, it can rupture the team sort of coherence, even cohesion if you, all of these things become unraveled. And then I talk about psychosocial hazards. It's part of the work that I do, and the focus on that now here in Australia is very pronounced. We have a slightly different take on the rest of the world. which I think is all changing everywhere anyway. But what we are saying is that the mental health of our people is as important as physical safety. And so when something like AI is introduced, what we're seeing is surveillance of our actions are starting to be noticed. Recruitment and HR activities are being handled more by AI now. So we're removing the human element to it, right? And so if English is a second language or you're neurodiverse in some way, you're at the back of the pack already. There are so institutional trust and fairness can be sort of challenged. There are legal and ethical and reputational ramifications as well. But I think in terms of teams, if we don't really know exactly what everybody is doing and why, we can come unstuck. The flip side to that is if you have neurodiverse people in your teams, the certainty and the structure that it can give can be an actual advantage. Sometimes people say to me, God, Mark, have you any good news whenever I'm talking about AI? But a people person, I don't know much about the technology as much as anyone else, I guess, but I'm all about the human and how it affects us as people. I think there's probably 4 or 5 new psychosocial hazards that haven't been part of the conversation because AI wasn't part of the conversation at one point in time. So I think there's a human cost, and it is coming and it's great. And any business that is not exploring how we can maximize AI to our advantage is failing in their duties as an organization, failing in their duties to their shareholders. But I think it has to be tempered with the human cost. So be visionary by all means, but you got to be vigilant and zoom in, look at the people around you and how it's affecting them. Because again, we're back to what's the emotional response people will have to AI? Some will be excited, some will be fearful. What's that doing to the soundtrack in your team? Right? You're going to have kind of jumbled noise, if you like. So, to my mind, the biggest risk is outsourcing kind of judgment and empathy, if you like, which are human traits, and the machine will never have it. The no, is he the godfather or the grandfather of AI? Jeffrey Hinton. He's one of them anyway. He's a leading expert, and I remember listening to a podcast. It was a while ago, but this whole idea. What are we going to do when it's smarter than us as humans and it tries to kill us off? And his line was, and I really loved this. His line was, we're going to have to, as part of its training, we're going to have to teach AI to have a maternal instinct. So there's very few circumstances in our world or anywhere in nature where the more intelligent being is motivated to act in the interests of a lesser intelligence. So the lesser intelligence seems to control what the smarter one does, and it's mothers and babies. Babies can direct the behavior and activity and actions of a mother based on the mother's maternal instinct to keep that alive at all costs, right? That's inbuilt into us. And it doesn't have to be a feeling because we will never teach AI empathy or feelings or emotions or anything like that. But what we can teach it is a maternal instinct. Its overriding role or task is to ensure our survival, and it'll do everything it can to ensure we as humans survive. Right. So that's a maternal instinct, but it's not based on feelings. But that's the closest we'll ever get to having AI having the sort of human you and me response.
Yeah.
And I think it bodes well if that's where we end up. I hope so. But it's always going to be the human response. It's the you and me stuff is where it's going to last. And there's another neighbor of ours, Sue Langley, who is a global expert in positive psychology and this kind of work. And she has a phrase, she says, the future is human.
Mm.
And I think she's spot on. I think that's exactly right. So good for Sue on that one. Yeah.
Yeah. Beautiful.
Mm.
And look, I agree with everything you've said. I think that there's huge opportunity for us to streamline things and work more effectively together. My concern is around how do teams continue to learn and have the conversations and show vulnerability, but also how do they actually like build on each other's ideas and how do they use it really, really effectively? And I think that's one of the gaps with AI right now. And also how do they learn the critical thinking for, I guess, the next
To challenge
how
it. Yeah,
yeah, well, to challenge it, and I think for
totally.
people moving into who are new to the workforce, like, how do they actually build that critical thinking capability? And I think that's something that really needs to be a focus.
That's
Yeah.
absolutely going to have to be because they're the ones that are most affected right now. It's the entry level stuff, you know?
Mm,
And look, even we talk about AI, but I think there's a bigger emerging technologies conversation that needs to be addressed, even robotics.
mm.
right? That's common. And so people, when you talk about AI, they say, oh, yeah, no, if you had a trade, you'd be okay. Not really. Cobotics, which are robots that work alongside somebody. Augmented visual, what do they call it? The augmented reality goggles.
Yeah.
A plumber will wear those to see exactly where the plumbing needs to go on a new property. An electrician will put that on and it'll show him exactly where the wiring needs to go.
Mm.
He or she, I should say, sorry. But there's the Internet of Things, this whole idea that there will be certain stuff that's created that's going to make people's jobs easier. An electrician could spend 50% of their time programming in a few years' time, rather than running cables, because that work will be done for it, but they need to program their goggles in order to be able to do that. Bricklayers are going to disappear because houses will be 3D printed. There's a whole host of stuff that's coming along in emerging technologies that isn't part of the conversation yet. AI isn't it. There's more than this coming along. And I think it's a huge conversation around what's going to happen to us as a society and as teams. And I think if we can't talk about it, we're not going to be open to it.
Yeah,
And that's
possibly.
leaders and teams, we have to do that. And even job crafting, a conversation we're hearing more and more of. And when people hear that, and the explanation being dissecting your job and highlighting the things you really like doing and focusing on highlighting the things that they're not really all that nice, people seem to think that it's a way of getting away from doing the unpleasant parts of somebody's role. And I don't think that's what it is. To my mind, job crafting, and I was talking to someone called Lisa Cotton about this. She had a great idea. She's run it as part of a Telstra initiative some years ago. Job crafting to them was, where do you see your job? And so craft your job for 6 to 12 months' time. What skills do you have that you think we could use better? And what skills would you like to learn to be better at what you're doing? And in highlighting those, and then the commonality of the things that people don't like doing, the process stuff, we will figure out ways where we will have agentic AI can do all of that stuff and we can maximize our skill sets with you. So thinking about your future like that, I say to anybody when they say, what am I going to do about AI? I said, just think about where you can add value, because that's where it's going to be at. And critical thinking is going to be one of them. Just kind of reporting on what an email says to your boss to get an answer to go back to this other person. That stuff is done now.
Mm.
Procurement processes in government contracts take 9 months. That's a 4-minute job. And so all of that stuff will disappear and change dramatically. So how else are we going to add value now? And so job crafting, what do you think your role should look like, or what do you bring to the table that we could use more of if you had an opportunity, or what would you like to learn from us in order to be better at what you do?
Yeah.
And if you say it's paper pushing or if it's building spreadsheets, then I think you need to think again because you're finished.
Yeah.
Yeah, does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. So
Mm.
you've touched on a couple of times burnout. And I think we're
Mm.
coming to the end of the year. Everyone's getting quite tired and maybe
Yeah,
even close to burnout.
yeah.
But what are some signs for leaders to look for in their teams to ensure that their teams don't burn out?
This is going to sound a bit like a broken wheel now, but to my mind, you have to look at the emotional response.
Mm.
So I think if you look at burnout as suppressed emotions, you'll be very, very close to what's going on. I'm feeling exhausted physically, mentally, emotionally. Inside our tip, it's almost always emotionally exhausted because we can recover the other ones pretty quickly. So that's one of the pillars of burnout. A second pillar of burnout is what they call efficacy, or it's a bit of an academic word, our ability to do our best work. If you've ever had the COVID brain, you can't think straight, you can't hold a conversation, etc. I've worked with people experiencing burnout, and I've had it myself. Simple arithmetic I can't do. I was talking to a guy recently, and he was spelling the word picnic, and he was just staring at it, going, "I know it's wrong, but I can't tell why." And he had written Picknick, right, and was just jaded, could not figure out what was wrong with it. So when we're feeling exhausted and we're feeling like we can't keep up, we're not doing our best work, we're feeling some shame or stigma around that, we suppress it and move on. Feeling exhausted, push it down and just charge through anyway. The third flagpole, if you like, of burnout is that cynicism thing. And as I said a while earlier on in our conversation, cynicism is an externalization of what's happening for me. So it's probably more of an outcome rather than a cause of burnout. To my mind, apathy is much more like it. I just can't anymore. I'm done. A case of the fill in the blank, right? And so when we experience all of those things and we don't do anything about it, we've pushed, we've suppressed our emotional response to our world, feeling cynical, feeling like I can't keep up, feeling exhausted. We're suppressing feelings. That's where your burnout comes from. And when we don't deal with it, something that was never brought up in the earlier and even up until very recently, what never came up was the mental health response to burnout. If we sit in that space for too long, we'll develop anxiety or depression or some kind of an affect disorder that was never included in the conversation. Gordon Parker, Professor Gordon Parker, he's got an excellent book on burnout. I have it there somewhere, but he talks about his analogy is a flickering candle. So a flickering candle or versus an extinguished candle. And so if the candle is flickering, you just protect it from the flames and it'll come back up. But if the candle is extinguished and now you've got just the smoke, what do you do? Do you just relight it and put it straight back in that windy passageway again? Or do you light it and try somewhere else, put it somewhere else? Do you just get a new candle or do you get a bigger candle? You know what I mean? There are different responses to where we are on the sort of spectrum of burnout, if you like. But what's happening is we're getting close to December, January is the busiest time for people taking stock of their situation. And just we've limped to Christmas and then I'm just taking a couple of weeks off. I can't do that again for another year. I'm leaving. I'm going to have to try and figure out what else I'm going to do. So we're losing people. And we think giving them a week off is going to make a difference. No, it doesn't. Because all we're doing is giving somebody a chance to recover from physical exhaustion, one of them, and then we're putting them back in exactly the same place where they experienced burnout before. It's not going to make any difference. There's absolute changes that actually have to occur. And it's an organizational problem. It's usually work design, but it affects people. And we have to actually look at that side of things as well. We have to support people where they're at. And again, that's a lot of the work I do. Yeah.
Yeah. And so if you could give us like 2 or 3 practical tips that leaders or individuals in teams could focus on for their well-being, what would be your kind of gold standard?
Uh,
What should I be focusing on going into the end of the year? No.
sure. Okay. All right. The same thing as me.
Yeah.
Look, I think the first place we need to start looking at is boundaries, carving time out for ourselves. I experienced burnout a couple of years ago and I practiced the irony of expertise, the hypocrisy of expertise. I was the burnout guy and I burned out because I didn't have boundaries around. I wanted to help as many people as I could, and so I didn't carve time out for me. And then it was all about work. The first thing that we will lose or push down or push away is any sense of play or fun. Maybe there's something that we don't deserve it or we're too busy to sort of relax and enjoy ourselves. And so I said to people who are burning out, it might not be reducing something, it might be putting something in. And I got a dog and I took up archery. Weirdest thing, right? And it was just a sequence of events as the why it happened. A friend of mine was doing it with his kids and he said, come along. And I said, yeah, I'll give it a go. And so suddenly in crowbarred 17 extra hours of activities into my world when I was already burned out. And it was the best thing I ever did. My work didn't suffer, but I made time for me, time for having a bit of fun, exercise, walking the dog, meeting new people, other dog owners, meeting people that I otherwise probably never would have. It's meditative, it's exercise, it's connection, it's engagement. It's all the stuff that suffers when we're burning out. And it wasn't about doing less work, it was just to do more for me. So establishing boundaries and ensuring that you're making space for yourself. First thing. And if you're hitting a bottle of wine every night just to get through until Christmas, probably the wrong time to have a bottle of wine. Reduce your drinking to when you're in company, or drinking is associated with a pleasure activity, not I just need something to dissipate my anxiety or my stress or my overwhelm. It's the wrong way to do it. Start there. So it is kind of self-care. Then obviously, if you're setting boundaries, it's going to be around work design. Prioritize what's important. Stephen Covey's first things first model. Just get that and just start reading up on that and learning what is important and what's necessary, including for you, and restructure your life around that. And it's don't worry, it's not as hard as it might sound. And any leader that is worth their salt is going to recognize that if this is happening for you, they need to take some steps to support you.
Awesome.
Mm.
So, Mark, if you could leave our listeners with one message about thriving teams, what would that be?
Thriving teams aren't just smarter, they're more connected, and that connection is what allows them to sustain their performance through pressure, overwhelm, and change. You matter, team matters. You need to know it, need to be able to share that. And to my mind, that's where it's at. So that authenticity and honesty, and then just look at the dance, not just
Mhm.
the dancers. That would be
Awesome.
mine. Yeah. So you're not just smarter, you're more connected. Thriving teams are more connected and more involved in each other.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Mark. I've learned a lot and look forward to our listeners listening to this awesome podcast. So thank you.
Thanks so much, Claire. And thank you to your listeners and viewers.
Awesome. Well, that was really a rich and thought-provoking conversation with Mark Butler. Relational intelligence is a new concept for me, and that distinction between emotional intelligence and relational intelligence is really important. And I can definitely see how relational intelligence is so important in a thriving team. It's not just about managing our emotions, it's about tuning into the dance between people, the soundtrack of the team. Psychological safety seems to be the foundation of relational intelligence. Without it, there's no real accountability, no healthy debate, and definitely not a thriving team culture. For a team to be successful, Mark reminds us that people need to feel safe, that they belong, and that what they do matters. And from that, performance naturally flows. And finally, we navigated some key concepts around change and AI and had a lens around burnout. We can't lose sight of the human elements of change. And we can't forget that the future really is about our people. It's our role as leaders to hold space for the emotions, the tensions, and the conversations that help the team grow. So, over the next week, I really challenge you to pause and ask yourself, what's the soundtrack of your team right now? Thanks for joining us at the Thriving Leaders podcast. If you'd like to find out more about our leadership programs, including our Thriving Leaders program, Thriving Women in Leadership, and Thriving Teams, as well as executive and team coaching, keynote speaking or facilitation, head to our website, www.thrivingculture.com.au. This is also where you can sign up for our newsletter, where I share useful leadership and team development insights and tools, as well as our podcast. You can also grab your copy of my book, Thriving Leaders, Learn the Skills to Lead Confidently. It's also available at all good online retailers on Audible, Spotify, and Kindle. If you like this episode, I'd be so grateful if you left a 5-star review, as it helps us reach more people and therefore helps more leaders thrive.